My husband, Jacob, and I had been married for just a week. Our honeymoon was supposed to be the perfect getaway, a long-awaited, meticulously planned escape to the Alps. But instead of heading to our dream destination together, I found myself boarding a different flight entirely, alone. It all started at the airport. As we unloaded our bags, I noticed two familiar figures approaching, his mother, Nora, and his younger sister, Angie. At first, I assumed they had come to see us off, to share one final goodbye before we embarked on our romantic adventure. But then, my gaze dropped to Angie's hands. She wasn't empty-handed. She had luggage. A bright, almost too cheerful surprise rang through the air as she pulled me into a hug. My body stiffened, my mind racing. No! This couldn't be happening. I had been crystal clear about this. I turned to Jacob, my heart pounding, silently pleading for an explanation. But his response wasn't the denial I had been hoping for. He didn't look confused or blindsided. He looked guilty. That was when he admitted it. After I had dismissed Nora's absurd request that Angie join us, Jacob had decided, on his own, that it was a wonderful idea. Behind my back, he reached out to Angie and told her that I was the one who had invited her. That it was meant to be a surprise for me. A surprise? Shock turned to fury, white-hot and uncontainable. My voice, normally composed, snapped as I spoke. This is unacceptable. Angie's face fell. Nora stiffened. Jacob swallowed hard. I liked Angie. She was a sweet person. She had been through a devastating divorce, an absolute nightmare of betrayal and heartbreak. I had sympathized with her deeply. But this was not my responsibility. This was my honeymoon. I wasn't going to take every person I liked on my honeymoon just because it would be a kind thing to do. There were boundaries. There were limits. And Jacob had just shattered them. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the fury simmering beneath my skin. But as I looked at my husband, the man I had promised my life to, I realized something unsettling. He hadn't just disregarded my feelings. He had deceived me. And I wasn't sure I could forgive that. I should have felt guilty. Maybe under different circumstances, I would have. But in that moment, guilt was the last thing on my mind. I turned to Jacob, my voice shaking with anger, and told him that what he did was unforgivable. Barely a week into our marriage, and he had already gone behind my back, already lied to me. And for what? He tried to brush it off like it was nothing, just a tiny misunderstanding. But it wasn't. He knew how much this honeymoon meant to me. He knew how long I had been planning for it. He knew, because I had made it clear. When Nora suggested bringing Angie along, I had told him exactly how I felt. I had told him that I didn't want her there, that this wasn't about her sadness or her heartbreak, it was about us. This wasn't a casual trip, it was our honeymoon, our time to be together. And yet, despite everything I had said, despite my clear refusal, he went behind my back and did it anyway. And now, he wanted to act like I was overreacting. Jacob looked at me, exasperated, telling me I was blowing things out of proportion. He tried to justify it by saying that Angie was paying for herself, that she would have her own room, that we wouldn't have to spend all our time together. But that wasn't the point. No matter how much he tried to sugarcoat it, she was still going to be there. And who, in their right mind, invites their recently divorced sister to tag along on their honeymoon? This wasn't a normal vacation. This was meant to be an intimate, once-in-a-lifetime trip, just for the two of us. I argued. He argued back. And then I realized something, I was wasting my breath. He wasn't listening, and worse, he wasn't even willing to admit that what he did was wrong. He refused to see how deeply he had betrayed my trust. And in that moment, I decided I was done. I wasn't about to let him ruin this for me. I had taken 3 weeks off work, and I wasn't going to let them go to waste. I snapped my suitcase shut, turned on my heel, and walked away. I told him not to follow me, but of course, he did. He trailed after me through the airport, still trying to reason with me, still trying to act like I was making a big deal out of nothing. I had to yell at him to stop. Loud enough that people turned to look. Loud enough that he finally froze in place. I told him that if he didn't stop following me, I would report him for harassment. That finally shut him up. He stopped dead in his tracks, staring at me, wounded. But I didn't care. I was furious, shaking with rage, desperate to get away from him. So I did. I booked myself onto the next flight out. Miami. I barely had to wait before boarding, and by the time Jacob could even process what was happening, I was gone. When I finally landed, I turned on my phone and was met with a flood of messages. Texts from Jacob. From Angie. From Nora. All of them apologizing, all of them desperate to fix what had happened. But there was only one apology that truly stood out to me. Angie's. She told me that when Jacob had first approached her with the idea, she had been shocked. He told her that I had suggested it, that I wanted her to come with us as a surprise. She had even considered asking me directly if it was really okay, but Jacob had insisted she keep it a secret. He had told her it was all part of the plan. She believed him. And now, standing in the aftermath of our airport disaster, she realized just how deeply she had been misled. She was genuinely sorry. Sorry for being dragged into this, sorry for unknowingly being part of this mess. She admitted that, had she been in my shoes, she would have reacted the same way. Her words felt sincere. And so, I forgave her. But Jacob and Nora? That was another story. Their apologies weren't really apologies at all. They were desperate attempts to justify themselves, to shift the blame onto me. They kept saying they had good intentions, that they never thought I would be this upset. They acted like I was the irrational one, like I was overreacting. They couldn't seem to grasp the simple fact that no matter how much I liked Angie, no matter how much I sympathized with her pain, I did not want her on my honeymoon. And if they couldn't understand that, then I didn't know what else to say to them. I knew I wasn't in the wrong. I knew I had every right to be upset. But still, a part of me felt guilty. And that guilt only grew worse as Jacob and I continued to fight. We fought nonstop. Because no matter how many times I told him how much he had hurt me, he refused to see it. He clung to his belief that his heart had been in the right place. He truly thought that Angie's presence wouldn't have ruined anything for me, but it would have meant everything to her. He believed that I should have just accepted it, that I should have been okay with it because it was the kind thing to do. And yet, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make him understand. I couldn't make him see how deeply he had damaged my trust. And I hated the way that made me feel. Hated how it made me question myself. I knew I wasn't the villain in this story. But after days of fighting, after countless texts and calls, I felt like I was losing my mind. I had to get away. I had to clear my head. So I did. I threw myself into exploring Miami, visiting every place I could, trying to distract myself from the storm brewing inside me. And for brief moments, it worked. The sun, the ocean, the vibrant energy of the city, it dulled the ache in my chest, if only for a little while. But it was always there, lurking beneath the surface. The nagging thought that this was far from over. That I would have to face Jacob eventually. That I couldn't avoid him forever. Because we weren't just dating. We weren't just two people who could break up and walk away. We were married. And for the first time since saying I do, I felt the crushing weight of what that truly meant. Less than a month into our marriage, and everything was already unraveling. That was the hardest part. It wasn't just about the fight, it was about the realization that maybe, just maybe, I had made a mistake. People always throw around words like red flag so easily. Just leave him. Divorce him. Be done with it. But in reality, it's not that simple. It's not just about the legal process, it's about the emotional wreckage, the weight of knowing you poured your heart into something that's now crumbling before your eyes. I had no idea what to do next. No plan. No roadmap. Just a sinking feeling that everything was slipping away, and I was powerless to stop it. Update 2. I came back from Miami a few days ago. And let me tell you, things have not been great. When I walked into our home, I was met with silence. Jacob wasn't there. 3 weeks. That's how long I was gone. And for the last week and a half of that, he had stopped texting me altogether. The last few messages he had sent were just him doubling down, telling me that I needed to rethink my decisions, that I was being rash, that he hadn't meant any harm. When I finally returned, I took a deep breath and did something I wasn't sure I wanted to do. I texted him. Just a simple message to let him know I was back. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I knew I couldn't live in this limbo any longer. He responded quickly. Said he'd come over the next day so we could talk. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could find some kind of resolution. But when he arrived, it was like nothing had changed. The same arguments, the same accusations, the same refusal to see my side of things. He told me, again, that I had overreacted. That I should have trusted him. That he would never do anything to damage our relationship. That I was making a big deal out of just a vacation. And that was what cut me the most. A honeymoon is not just a vacation. A honeymoon is supposed to be about two people starting their lives together. And he had tainted ours with deceit. More than that, he had lied to me. Not only had he gone behind my back, but he had twisted the story to Angie, making it seem like I had been the one to invite her. He kept calling me selfish, but in my mind, he was the selfish one. He had thrown my feelings aside just so he could play the hero for his family. And standing in that room, listening to him dismiss everything I had been through, I felt something inside me harden. Then, he told me something that left me reeling. He had been living in a hotel ever since I left. Said he hadn't even gone home because he couldn't stand being in our house alone. And when I had stopped responding to his texts, he had seriously considered filing for divorce himself because he thought I had taken things too far. I stared at him, incredulous. How could he twist this around like that? How could he make it seem like I was the one who destroyed everything? We argued for hours, but it was clear we were getting nowhere. He kept repeating that I just didn't understand because I had never had a sibling. Maybe he was right. Maybe I would never understand that kind of bond. But I do understand boundaries. I do understand trust. And I do understand that when you love someone, you don't betray them like this. I read every single comment people left on my last post. So many of them from people with siblings, people who agreed that this was beyond inappropriate. People who saw what Jacob refused to see. That alone made me feel less crazy. And now, I've made up my mind. If he doesn't apologize, if he doesn't acknowledge what he's done, I'm calling my lawyer. I'll start the divorce proceedings myself. Marriage counseling had crossed my mind, but I knew it would only be an option if he truly showed remorse. And right now, that seemed unlikely. The irony of it all? Angie, the very person Jacob and Nora were fighting so hard for, was on my side. She had reached out to me multiple times, trying to reason with them, trying to make them see that what they had done was beyond messed up. But they wouldn't listen to her either. Because to them, this wasn't about doing the right thing. This was about being right, no matter the cost. And honestly, I was exhausted. Completely drained. I didn't marry a man who would put me second. And yet, that's exactly what Jacob had become. Final update. It's been months since my last post. I know I disappeared, but I needed to. Because the truth is, I've been going through hell. Jacob and I are officially getting a divorce. I gave him a chance. I really did. A few days after my last update, he told me he wanted to work on our marriage. Said he wasn't ready to lose me. So, against my better judgment, I agreed to marriage counseling. For a while, I thought maybe, just maybe, it would help. In those sessions, he seemed open, willing to listen, ready to change. But the moment we walked out of that office, everything would snap back to how it was before. The fights. The accusations. The sheer stubbornness of it all. We lasted a month before we both admitted the truth. This wasn't going to work. The worst part? Despite everything, ending it was still devastating. We were both shattered. But I knew, deep in my soul, that I couldn't live like this. I wasn't going to spend my life being an afterthought to my own husband. We filed for divorce mutually, and right now, we're in the settlement phase. I don't even care what I get out of it. I just want this nightmare to be over. I want to move on. I want to pretend that this was all some horrible fever dream. I've started looking into therapy for myself. Because honestly, I need it. This entire experience has left me shaken in ways I never expected. My parents and friends have been my rock through all of this, and I'm so grateful. Of course, people are gossiping. Whispering about how my marriage fell apart in less than a year. But I don't care. The only opinions that matter are the ones of the people who have stood by me. So that's it. That's my story. The next few months will be painful. But I'll get through them. Because people survive worse, don't they? And if they can, so can I.